With an army second to none, an effective cavalry, and a sophisticated administration, the Assyrian Empire held sway over the entire Near East in the mid-7th century BC. It was the largest, best organized state the ancient world had ever seen, appearing unattainable and invincible to its enemies. But how did it become such a dominant power? Arguably, 4 major factors gave the Assyrian army an edge over the other city-states of Mesopotamia. An unmatched propaganda of terror, expertise in siege warfare, adept administration, and finally, being the first major power in history to utilize a regular cavalry. Now, to understand all this properly, let's quickly backtrack and have a brief look at how Assyria rose to power. The rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire coincided with one of humankind's greatest technological advances, the processing of iron. Soon after the beginning of the Iron Age, in the late 2nd millennium BC, iron tools changed pretty much every aspect of life in the Near East, especially agriculture. Around the same time, a series of capable rulers bolstered the strength of the city-states of Ashur, located on the Tigris River. At the time, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was divided between city-states struggling for dominance. Only twice had it been united under a single ruler, first in the 24th century BC under Sargon of Akkad, and second in the 18th century BC under the famous lawgiver Hammurabi. Starting around 1300 BC, Assyria began to expand. By the time of King Tiglath-Pileser I, it was the dominant power in eastern Mesopotamia. Toward the end of Tiglath-Pileser's reign, however, the Assyrians' fortunes declined. Aramean tribes invaded their lands from the western desert, and the so-called Sea Peoples threw the eastern Mediterranean into disorder. When the crisis, commonly referred to as the Late Bronze Age collapse, finally came to an end about 150 years later, Assyria emerged as one of the very few powers that had not been fully destroyed. Soon, its kings began to create the empire that would eventually absorb much of the Near East, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. By 900 BC, smiths had developed the procedures to make hard iron suitable for weapons and tools, and Assyria slowly but steadily began to arm its richest warriors with these advanced weapons. However, the impact of iron weapons was marginal for the next few hundred years. In any case, soon Assyria engaged in extensive military campaigns, led by the warlike kings Ashur-nasir-pal II and his son Shalmaneser III. Following a tried and true strategy, they expanded their empire along trade routes, mainly east and west, and secured Assyria's borders just beyond the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Their grand strategy was shaped by what historian Arthur Farrell once called the Assyrian Triangle. In the north, the mountainous region of Urartu and its friendly tribes were a constant threat. In the southeast, the fiercely independent Babylon and the aggressive Elamites presented an ongoing challenge. And in the west, the Assyrians shared an uneasy border with the Israelites. Over time, these ongoing struggles transformed the Assyrians into a formidable military force that viewed warfare as preemptive and offensive. In other words, that the best defense was good offense. The Assyrian kings relied on a combination of offensive campaigns and controlled conquered territories with an iron fist. They installed garrisons at strategic points of their empire and maintained a strong central army under the command of the king. These strategies were extremely successful. From the 9th to the 7th century BC, they conquered a significant portion of the ancient Near East. This expansion reached its peak when Esarhaddon seized Egypt. The bulwark of this success was a strong army and an effective military system, which relied on the previously mentioned 4 major factors. Let's explore what set the Assyrian army apart from the other powers and city-states in the region. In the 8th century BC, the city of Suru, now Al-Suvar in eastern Syria, revolted. According to the annals of King Ashur-nasir-pal II, found in Nimrud, Ashur-nasir-pal, who was notorious for his brutality, seized the opportunity to teach the people of Suru and all the other cities in his realm an important lesson. By the time his army was at the gates of Suru, the inhabitants were already having second thoughts. But despite their pleas and unconditional surrender, Ashur-nasir-pal showed no mercy. He stormed the city, installed a new governor, and made an example of the rebels by dismembering and flaying them. The message was clear: rebellion against Assyria would not be tolerated. While shocking to the modern ear, the fate of the Suru rebels was not especially brutal by normal Assyrian standards. Primary sources, inscriptions and reliefs consistently depict brutal military retaliation for disloyalty and cruel treatment of defeated enemies. And the Assyrians weren't alone. Other states at the time treated rebels no less brutally, as Sarah Melville, professor of ancient history at Clarkson University, explains, quote, "Despite Assyria's modern reputation as a brutal oppressor that cowed the hapless peoples of the ancient Near East through torture and terrorism, Assyrian military methods were generally in line with those of other city-states. The ruthless treatment of defeated enemies and the punishment of rebels were prevalent throughout the ancient world." End quote. What set Assyria apart was that the Assyrian kings consciously adopted a propaganda of terror, presenting themselves as terrible, invincible, and ruthless to keep their subjects in check and intimidate their enemies. This form of propaganda served a specific purpose. It helped the Assyrian kings deter rebellions within the empire and intimidate hostile tribes or kingdoms into surrendering. By deliberately showcasing their brutality, the Assyrians made sure their enemies knew what to expect if they didn't submit. Recently, historians have argued that much of this propaganda was exaggerated. It was mainly terror advertised and not applied, they argue. But even if the Assyrians did not always live up to their self-created brutal reputation, the image they crafted certainly helped prevent resistance. Opposing leaders knew to expect especially gruesome fates. For example, when one Yata, a rebel leader of the desert Bedouins, came to Nineveh to seek forgiveness, Ashurbanipal II had his jawbones pierced, threaded a rope through them, and chained him to the city gates like a dog. Horrifying tales like this certainly helped keep conquered populations subdued. But fear alone isn't enough to maintain an empire. In 701 BC, an Assyrian army laid siege to the city of Lachish in Judah. The siege is captured in a wall relief from the southwest palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh, which is currently housed in the British Museum. The far left shows how the Assyrians attacked Lachish, while the center and right show King Sennacherib's triumph. According to the historian Louis Siddal, an unintended consequence of the Assyrians' military strength and intimidation campaigns was that enemies often retreated behind the safety of their walls. As a result, much of Assyrian warfare involved not pitched battles, but sieges. This turned the Assyrians into masters of siege warfare. Ideally, the Assyrians' terror propaganda instilled fear into the defenders of a fortified place, prompting them to surrender at the first glimpse of an army. If a city dared to defy the Assyrians by refusing to open its gates, the Assyrians had various ways to enter forcibly. Fabrice de Baker, an expert in Mesopotamian history and ancient tactics at the University of Vienna, meticulously reconstructed the phases of besieging a city by studying the scenes depicted in the palatial reliefs of the Assyrian kings, one of the most important sources on Neo-Assyrian warfare. According to de Baker, sieges usually began with a reconnaissance by scouts and light cavalry, followed by encirclement. Then, archers and slingers engaged in skirmishes to weaken the defenders. Finally, the army advanced, using various means to capture the city, including scaling ladders, ramps, battering rams, siege towers, torches, tunneling, and even diverting rivers. As shown in this relief from Nimrud, multiple techniques were often combined, such as siege ladders and battering rams. If the Assyrians couldn't force their way into the city, they used blockades to starve the enemy. In some cases, sieges reportedly went on for more than a year. Sennacherib's siege of Babylon, for example, began in 689 BC and went on for more than 15 months. The Assyrians must have had an extraordinary supply system to maintain sieges for that long. Especially worth seeing are the Assyrian siege engines. For example, this relief shows Ashur-Nazir-Pal's men attacking a fortress with a combined siege tower and battering ram. And this detail from the siege of Lachish in 701 BC depicts a soldier dousing a fire by pouring water on it. The Assyrians also had miners capable of tunneling under walls and armored sappers who prized away at the foundations of walls and gates with pikes, spears, and even daggers. Despite these sophisticated techniques, Assyriologist Stephanie Daly doubts the existence of siege work specialists, because no specific terms for such professions have been identified. Like her, most historians consider it probable that the Assyrians took a jack-of-all-trades approach, with the infantry taking up shovels when required and local people recruited to help. Still, there must have been a considerable number of craftsmen and engineers available to provide the necessary expertise. All in all, the Assyrians' siege skills were cutting edge. They mastered all aspects of this form of warfare except for catapults, and balanced their army to make it equally effective in sieges and battles, which significantly contributed to the empire's military success. However, successful siege warfare wouldn't have been possible without skillful administration and innovative ideas. Combining military branches such as artillery and infantry has been a challenge throughout history. Powers that find workable solutions almost always have the upper hand, and that was the case with the Assyrians. They organized their army very cleverly, dovetailing shock, missile, mobile and siege troops into an effective force. We won't go into too much detail here, but generally speaking, the Assyrian military was an integrated army centered around infantry, archers and spearmen, who were supported by a mobile arm of chariots and cavalry. It was based on a central army and conscripted soldiers from the provinces, which could be complemented by professional militias. One major reason this army was so effective was that the Assyrian kings built a reliable military system while remaining open to innovation and change. They continuously imported, incorporated and improved military ideas, expertise and weapons from neighboring societies and conquered peoples. For example, they relied on foreign military experts, mercenaries and auxiliary troops who introduced new ideas and technologies from their homelands. This borrowing and adapting took place not just in warfare, but also in other areas. For example, the Assyrians learned how to make water tunnels from the Canaanites and Syrians. The necessary counterpart to innovation is a solid base. In the Neo-Assyrian Empire, this was provided by a sophisticated administration, which ensured that there were sufficient funds to maintain both the army and the empire. The kings not only maintained a network of roads for fast communication and transport, but also sought to control supplies and trade routes. Shalmaneser III, for example, focused his expansionist campaigns to the west because there were good sources of iron and silver in the area of Karkar, and to the east because many important trade routes passing through the Zagros Mountains. This allowed the Assyrian kings to control the flow of goods in the region. In general, control was key in ruling a vast empire. The Assyrians achieved this by dividing the empire into provinces, each with a governor who answered directly to the king. Distant provinces were run by vassal kings, with a bureaucracy and civil service making sure everything ran smoothly. Each province regulated and supplied labor and military service, with feudal land tenure providing the basis for military service. In addition, there was a strong central army, which, by the time of Tiglath-Pileser II, remained in service all year round, and is thus considered a standing army by many historians. Tiglath-Pileser II also did much to centralize power. He reorganized the provinces and introduced an effective central government. Just how effective this was can be seen in the fourth element of Assyrian warfare we discuss here, cavalry. There is much more to cavalry warfare than the romance and glory of the galloping charge. One particularly challenging aspect was procuring horses. This might seem odd at first, but even 2,500 years later, it was considered a miraculous deed when Napoleon secured an additional 10,000 horses for his invasion of Belgium before the Battle of Waterloo. In the ancient world, when horses were not commonly used in agriculture and breeding was still in the early stages of development, mounts fit for warfare were not readily available. Because of this, horse recruitment was a matter of utmost importance to the kings of Assyria. By the 7th century BC, there were special horse officials called Musarkisus, usually 2 to a province, who reported directly to the king rather than the provincial governors. Their job was to travel through their assigned province and collect horses for the king. This process was quite efficient, with daily horse reports written to the overseer of the royal stables at Nineveh. According to these reports, about 100 horses arrived there daily, which reflects not only on the effectiveness of the system, but also provides a glimpse into the overall military administration of the empire. The first known confirmed image of a human riding a horse from the Near East is this seal impression from the city-state of Ur, which is dated to the late 3rd millennium BC. There is a significant leap between sitting on a horse and using cavalry in warfare, especially in battle, which is an entirely different matter than just using a horse as a fast means of transport. According to the historian Robert Druce, it was not until the 9th century that people were able to ride well enough to wield a weapon on horseback. However, there seems to be an unresolved scholarly debate about this, so take this with a grain of salt. In any case, the Assyrians mastered this skill early on, and they were the first major power to use regular cavalry in battle. The Neo-Assyrian army inherited a warrior ethic based on elite chariotry. Up to the 9th century, chariots made up its mobile arm. Like the more well-known Egyptian chariots, they were used for fast flanking maneuvers, to harass the enemy and to pursue fleeing units. During the reign of Ashur-nasir-pal II, for the first time, these chariots were complemented by cavalry. After that, for a very long time, cavalry and chariots were deployed side by side, as army reports and reliefs show. At the beginning, horsemen operated in teams of 2, a rider who held the reins and an archer. According to the historian Robin Archer, chariot warfare and cavalry warfare were fairly equivalent. They operated on the same principles, relied mainly on hit-and-run tactics, and had the same job: to open battles with quick maneuvers along the front line and flanks, and pursue fleeing units. So why then did the Assyrians not simply stick to chariots? Archer sees the change from chariotry to cavalry as a process of evolution. As Assyria grew larger, it was confronted with new rivals and new geographical challenges. This was especially the case in the highland regions in the north, where rough terrain made chariots virtually useless. The answer to this problem was the creation of a chariot unit without a chariot: Ashur-nasir-pal II's cavalry teams. Once this new division was created, it slowly developed into its own procedures, and over the next 2 centuries it evolved into the first true light cavalry. Horsemanship and equipment gradually improved, until eventually new reins and bits made it possible for horsemen to ride and fight on their own. First as mounted archers, and then with other weapons as well, especially lances. Better breeds for horses and foreign experts, mainly from Urartu, who advised the Assyrians in all things equine, made them even more effective. Under Sargon II, for the first time, an independent cavalry force was created. By then, the chariot had been reduced to a secondary role by the cheaper, more effective, and more mobile cavalry. So, all in all, a propaganda of terror, proficiency in siege warfare, elaborate administration, and the use of regular cavalry were major factors in the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Although these are considered the primary factors, there are certainly others. If you know of one, feel free to share it in the comment section below. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was the dominant power in the Near East for 3 centuries. Its supremacy only faltered when the semi-nomadic Medes invaded it in 614 BC. However, the Medes wouldn't last long. They were soon overthrown by the Persians, who founded an empire even bigger than the Assyrians. But that is a topic for another video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a Patreon. We're trying to reach our monthly goal of $600, which will help us cover the cost of the extensive artwork in our videos.